Her abusive ex grabbed her neck at a grocery store. The Korean Mafia boss slowly took off his jacket. The slap echoed through the quiet grocery store like a gunshot. A carton of eggs shattered on the white tiles. People froze. No one moved. No one spoke. And in the center of the aisle, Amina Johnson staggered backward, her hand trembling against her cheek as the burning sting spread across her face. Her 5-year-old daughter screamed. "Mama!" Lil Zara clung to Amina's leg, her tiny fingers shaking as tears streamed down her face. Standing in front of them was the man Amina had spent 3 years trying to escape. Her ex, Derek Cole, his face twisted with anger, his breath heavy with alcohol, even though it was barely noon. "You think you can run from me?" he snarled. Amina's chest tightened. Her heart pounded so hard she could hear in her ears. Not here. Not in front of her daughter. Not again. "Derek, please," she whispered, trying to keep her voice steady. "Let's not do this here." But Derek stepped closer. Too close. His shadow swallowed her. "You took my kid," he said through clenched teeth. "You think you can just disappear?" Zara hid her face in Amina's coat. "Mama, I'm scared." Amina wrapped an arm around her daughter, pulling her close. "It's okay, baby," she whispered. But her voice trembled because she knew Derek, and she knew what that look in his eyes meant. The same look he had the night she ran away. The same look he had when he broke the kitchen chair against the wall. The same look he had when she realized if she stayed, she might not survive. Derek suddenly grabbed her collar. Gasps spread through the aisle. His hand tightened near her neck, pulling her closer. "You embarrass me," he hissed, "running away like I'm some monster." Amina struggled against his grip. "Let go of me." But Derek only laughed. A cruel, mocking laugh. "Oh, now you're brave?" he said loudly. "In public?" He shoved her back. Amina stumbled into the shelf behind her. Boxes of cereal fell around her. Zara burst into hysterical crying. "Stop hurting my mommy." But Derek turned toward the little girl with cold eyes. "Shut that kid up," he snapped. The store had gone silent. Customers watched. Employees stood frozen. Phones slowly came out. But no one stepped forward. Derek raised his hand again, and Amina closed her eyes. She had learned long ago that sometimes it hurt less if you didn't see it coming. But the second slap never landed, because suddenly a deep voice cut through the aisle. Cold, calm, dangerous. "Take your hand off her." The entire store went still. Derek frowned and turned. Standing at the end of the aisle was a tall man in a black suit. He hadn't been there before. Or maybe no one noticed him until now. But the moment he stepped forward, the atmosphere changed. The air itself felt heavier. Behind him stood 2 men in dark coats, silent, watching. The tall man slowly approached, his expression unreadable. Sharp black eyes fixed on Derek. Amina felt something shift in her chest. She didn't know why, but suddenly she felt safer. The man stopped a few feet away. Then he did something strange. He calmly removed his jacket, folded it, and handed it to one of the men behind him. The gesture was slow, deliberate, like someone preparing for something unpleasant. The store manager whispered to an employee near the register. Who is that?" But another worker swallowed hard. "I think—" His voice dropped. "That's Kong Min-jae." A chill spread through the room, because everyone in Seoul knew that name. Kong Min-jae, the man who controlled half the city's underground world. The man whose enemies disappeared. The man newspapers called the Korean Mafia boss. And right now, his dark gaze was locked on Derek. "Let go," Min-jae said quietly. Derek scoffed. "And who the hell are you?" Min-jae didn't answer. Instead, his eyes flicked briefly to Amina, and then to the small girl, clinging to her. His jaw tightened. Something cold flashed across his face. Then he looked back at Derek. "You're frightening the child." Derek laughed loudly. "Oh, please." He tightened his grip on Amina again. "She's my woman, my kid. I can do whatever I want." That was when Min-jae moved. It happened so fast most people barely saw it. One moment Derek was talking. The next, his hand was ripped away from Amina. Derek stumbled back in shock. Min Jae stood between him and Amina now. Tall, silent, deadly calm. Derek rubbed his wrist angrily. You just made a huge mistake. Min Jae tilted his head slightly. Did I? His voice was almost bored, like a man discussing the weather. Derek puffed his chest. You know who I am? Min Jae's lips curved into the faintest smile. Yes. The word made Derek hesitate. Min Jae stepped closer. You're Derek Cole, he said calmly. 34 years old. 2 assault charges. 1 restraining order violation. Derek's face went pale. And Min Jae continued softly. You just touched a woman who asked you not to. The temperature in the store seemed to drop. Zara peeked from behind her mother. Her tear-stained eyes stared at the tall man. Mama, she whispered. Is he a superhero? Amina almost laughed through her fear. But before she could answer, Derek suddenly lunged forward. You think you can embarrass me? Gasps erupted. But Min Jae didn't move. Not until the last second. Then he sidestepped effortlessly. Derek crashed into the shelf. Boxes fell everywhere. And Min Jae grabbed the back of his collar with one hand. The movement was controlled, precise, terrifyingly calm. He leaned close to Derek's ear and spoke quietly, but everyone in the aisle heard it. If you touch her again, his voice was ice. You will disappear. Derek froze, because suddenly he realized something. The 2 silent men behind Min Jae had moved closer, and the way they were watching him was the way wolves watch prey. Min Jae released Derek's collar. The man staggered backward. Sweat now covered his face. You're crazy, Derek muttered, trying to regain his pride. But his voice shook. Min Jae said nothing. He simply stared. Seconds passed. Then Derek pointed angrily at Amina. This isn't over. But he didn't step forward again. Instead, he backed away, then turned and stormed out of the store. The door slammed behind him. The entire grocery store exhaled. Silence returned. Min Jae turned slowly. Amina was still holding Zara tightly. Her hands trembled. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Zara stepped forward shyly. Her small voice broke the silence. Thank you for saving my mommy. Min Jae blinked, and for the first time, the dangerous Mafia boss looked slightly surprised. Then something unexpected happened. He knelt down, so he was eye level with the little girl. You're welcome, he said gently. Zara studied his face carefully, then whispered loudly, You're very scary. One of the bodyguards coughed, hiding a laugh, but Min Jae's lips twitched. I've heard that before. Amina finally found her voice. Thank you, she said quietly. Min Jae stood again. Up close, he looked even more intimidating, but his eyes softened slightly when he looked at her. You shouldn't be alone if that man is still looking for you, he said. Amina swallowed. I didn't expect him to find us. Min Jae studied her carefully. Then his gaze shifted to Zara again. The little girl was still holding her mother's coat. Something about the sight made his expression darken. Finally, he said something that would change all their lives. Come with me. Amina blinked. What? Min Jae's voice was calm. Until I deal with him, you and your daughter will stay somewhere safe. Amina hesitated. She didn't even know this man, but the fear from moments ago still lingered in her chest. And deep down, she knew Derek wouldn't stop. Min Jae extended his hand slightly. Trust me. Zara tugged on her sleeve. Mama? The little girl looked up at the Mafia boss. I think he's a good guy. Min Jae raised an eyebrow, and for the first time, he smiled. Part 2. The black car waiting outside the grocery store looked too expensive for the quiet neighborhood. Its glossy surface reflected the gray afternoon sky like a mirror. Amina hesitated at the entrance of the store, clutching Zara's small hand. She had agreed to follow the man who had just protected her. But now that they stood outside, reality was sinking in. She didn't even know him. Not really. Yet the entire store had reacted to his name like he was someone powerful, someone dangerous. Behind them, the tall man stepped out of the grocery store calmly, his bodyguards following close behind. People inside were still whispering, some staring through the glass doors. Amina felt nervous again. Zara tugged her sleeve. "Mama?" "Yes, baby?" The little girl pointed at the car. "Is that his?" Amina nodded slowly. "I think so." Zara looked impressed. "That's a superhero car." One of the bodyguards chuckled softly. Min-jae approached them, his expression calm as always. But when his eyes landed on the red mark still faintly visible on Amina's cheek, his jaw tightened slightly. "Did he hurt you badly?" he asked. His voice was low, controlled. Amina shook her head quickly. "I'm okay." She wasn't. Her cheek still burned. Her heart was still racing. But she had learned long ago how to say, "I'm fine," even when she wasn't. Min-jae didn't argue, but the way he studied her face made it clear he didn't believe her. He opened the back door of the car. "You'll stay somewhere safe tonight." Amina hesitated again. "I don't want to cause trouble for you." One of the bodyguards exchanged a look with the other. "Trouble? For Kang Min-jae?" Min-jae finally spoke again. "That man already caused trouble." His eyes darkened slightly. "And I don't like unfinished problems." Zara looked up at him curiously. "Are you a police officer?" The bodyguards froze. Amina looked mortified. "Zara, but—" Min-jae surprised everyone. He crouched slightly again, meeting the girl's eyes. "No," he said calmly. "Then what are you?" she asked. Min-jae paused. For a moment, he looked almost amused. Then he answered simply, "Someone who doesn't like bullies." Zara nodded seriously. "I don't like bullies either." Min-jae stood again, and for the briefest moment, something in his expression softened. "Good," he said. Then he gestured to the car. "Let's go." The ride. The inside of the car smelled like leather and expensive cologne. Amina sat stiffly in the back seat with Zara curled against her side. The city lights of Seoul blurred past a window. Min-jae sat across from them, silent, watching, not in a threatening way, but in the careful way someone studies a situation. Zara, however, had no such caution. She stared at him openly. Finally, she whispered loudly to her mother, "He's really handsome." Amina almost choked. "Zara," but one of the bodyguards in the front seat started laughing. Min-jae remained completely calm, though the corner of his mouth twitched slightly. "Children are very honest," he said. Amina buried her face in her hands briefly. "I'm so sorry." "It's fine." Zara leaned closer to him. "Do you have kids?" The question hung in the air. For the first time since they met, Min-jae's expression changed. Something darker flickered in his eyes. "No," just that single word. Zara nodded thoughtfully. "You'd be a good dad." The car went completely silent. Even the driver glanced at the mirror. Min-jae looked out the window for a moment before speaking again. "That's unlikely." The safe house. The car stopped in front of a tall, modern building overlooking the Han River. Amina's eyes widened. "Is this a hotel?" Min-jae shook his head. "No." One of the bodyguards opened the door. "This building belongs to the boss." Amina stepped out slowly, holding Zara's hand. The lobby was enormous. Marble floors, soft lighting, private security guards at every entrance. This was not a normal apartment building. Min-jae led them to a private elevator. As the doors closed, Zara whispered again, "Are you rich?" Min-jae answered without hesitation, "Yes." The elevator dinged. The doors opened to a massive penthouse floor. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed the entire glittering city. Amina stood frozen. "You live here?" "No." Min-jae stepped inside. "It's empty." He turned to one of the bodyguards. "Have someone bring food." Then he looked at Amina again. "You'll stay here for now." Amina felt overwhelmed. This is too much. Min-jae walked toward the window. "You and your daughter are targets as long as that man is angry." He turned slightly. "And men like him rarely stop." Amina's stomach twisted. She knew he was right. Zara, meanwhile, had discovered the enormous couch. She jumped onto it happily. "Mama, look." Amina almost laughed for the first time that day. But the moment didn't last. because suddenly one of Min Jae's bodyguards' phones rang. The man answered quietly. His expression darkened immediately. "Boss!" Min Jae turned. "What is it?" The guard hesitated, then spoke. "That man from the grocery store." Amina felt her chest tighten. "What about him?" The bodyguard continued. "He's outside." The room went silent. Amina's heart dropped. "Outside? Already?" Min Jae's expression turned completely cold. "And—" The guard swallowed. "He didn't come alone." Another bodyguard walked to the window and looked down. 5 men. Amina's hand started shaking. Zara noticed immediately. "Mama?" Min Jae walked calmly toward the window. He looked down at the street far below. Sure enough, Derek stood near a truck. 4 rough-looking men stood behind him. Even from this height, his anger was obvious. "He followed us," Amina whispered. Min Jae didn't respond right away. Instead, he slowly rolled up the sleeves of his white shirt. The movement was quiet, controlled, but the air in the room changed instantly. One of the bodyguards spoke carefully. "Boss, we can handle this." Min Jae looked down at Derek again, then shook his head. "No." He grabbed his jacket from the chair. Amina stepped forward nervously. "You don't have to do this." Min Jae looked at her, his expression unreadable. "I told you earlier." His voice was calm. "I don't like unfinished problems." He walked toward the elevator. The bodyguards followed immediately. Amina's heart pounded. "Wait!" Min Jae paused. She hesitated. What if he gets hurt? Min Jae's eyes darkened slightly. He should have thought about that before. Then the elevator doors closed. Zara climbed off the couch. "Mama, what's he doing?" Amina looked toward the elevator. Fear and something else twisted inside her chest. "He's going to make sure that man never hurts us again." Down on the street, Derek was about to learn exactly who he had threatened. Part 3. The night air outside the building was cold. A black SUV sat parked near the curb. Street lights flickered softly over the empty road. And standing beside a rusty pickup truck was Derek Cole. His patience was running thin. He paced back and forth angrily, rubbing his jaw. "I know she's in there," he muttered. One of the men behind him spat on the ground. "Relax," the man said. "You said she's just some scared woman." Derek scoffed. "She is." But his voice carried less confidence than before. Another man crossed his arms. "Then why'd you call us?" Derek hesitated. For a brief second, the memory of the grocery store flashed in his mind. The tall man, the cold eyes, the way he moved. Derek shook the thought away. "That guy in the store," he said. "He thinks he's tough." One of the men laughed. "Well, we got 5 guys here. Let's see how tough he is." Suddenly, the glass doors of the building opened. Every man turned. The first thing they saw were 2 large men in dark suits stepping outside. Bodyguards. Their presence alone made the atmosphere heavier. Then the third man walked out. Tall, calm, silent. Kong Min Jae. He stepped down onto the sidewalk slowly. His polished shoes echoed softly on the pavement. The moment Derek saw him, his stomach twisted, but he forced himself to smirk. "Well, look who came down," Derek said loudly. His friend stepped forward beside him. Min Jae stopped several feet away. His expression didn't change. "Leave," he said. His voice was quiet, but it carried across the street like steel. Derek laughed. "You think you can scare me?" Min Jae tilted his head slightly. "No." He slipped one hand casually into his pocket. "I know I can." One of Derek's friends scoffed. "Man, who do you think you?" The bodyguard beside Min Jae moved slightly, just a small step forward. But the man instantly stopped talking. Something about the way these men stood, the way they watched, it made the street feel dangerous. Derek pointed toward the building. "That woman is mine." Min Jae's eyes darkened immediately. "No." The word was quiet, but final. Derek stepped closer. "You think money makes you powerful?" Min Jae said nothing. Derek's anger boiled over. "You don't know who you're messing with." Min Jae looked at him carefully. Then he spoke. Derek Cole. Derek froze. How do you know my name? Min Jae ignored the question. You have two choices tonight. He raised two fingers calmly. You walk away. He lowered one finger. Or you don't. One of Derek's friends laughed loudly. Is that supposed to be a threat? Min Jae looked at the man. Just looked. The laughter stopped instantly. Derek clenched his fists. You think I'm afraid of you? Min Jae's answer was simple. You should be. The street went silent. Then suddenly, Derek lunged forward. You think you can steal my family? But before he could even reach Min Jae, one of the bodyguards stepped in front of him. The movement was fast, precise. Derek swung a punch. The bodyguard caught his wrist effortlessly, twisted, and Derek dropped to one knee with a painful grunt. The other men rushed forward, but the second bodyguard moved just as quickly. Within seconds, two men were pinned against a truck. One was flat on the pavement, and another backed away nervously. The entire fight had lasted less than 10 seconds. Min Jae hadn't even moved. He walked forward slowly. Derek was still kneeling, breathing heavily. Min Jae crouched down slightly. Their eyes met. You followed her. His voice was calm. Derek tried to pull his arm free, but couldn't. She belongs to me. Min Jae's expression turned colder than ice. No woman belongs to you. Derek glared. You don't even know her. Min Jae stood. You're right. He looked toward the building above them. But I know enough. Then he looked back at Derek. And I know men like you. Derek spat near his shoe. You think this scares me? Min Jae nodded once. It should. He turned slightly toward one of his bodyguards. Make sure he understands. Derek's eyes widened. What does that mean? Min Jae began walking back toward the building. His voice drifted back over his shoulder. After tonight, he will never come near that woman again. Panic flickered across Derek's face. Hey, wait! But the bodyguard tightened his grip, and Min Jae kept walking. The glass doors closed behind him. Inside the penthouse above, Amina stood near the window, staring down at the street. Her heart pounded. She could barely make out the figures below, but she saw Derek being forced to his knees. Zara tugged her sleeve. Mama? Amina swallowed. Yes. The little girl looked up with wide eyes. Is the scary man winning? Amina looked at the tall figure, walking calmly back toward the building entrance. And for the first time since that afternoon, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Safe. Yes, she whispered. He is. But neither of them knew yet. That Derek Cole was desperate, and desperate men often make the most dangerous choices. Part 4. The penthouse was quiet. Too quiet. Amina stood near the large window, overlooking the city lights of Seoul. Cars moved like tiny glowing insects far below, and the Han River shimmered under the moon. But her mind wasn't on the view. It was on the street below. On Derek. On the path she had tried so hard to escape. Behind her, Zara had fallen asleep on an enormous couch, hugging one of the soft pillows like a teddy bear. The poor girl had cried herself to sleep. Amina walked over and gently brushed a curl away from her daughter's face. I'm sorry, she whispered softly. Sorry that Zara had seen the shouting. Sorry that she had seen fear. Sorry that her childhood had already been touched by pain. Amina straightened slowly. That was when she heard the elevator doors open. Her heart jumped. Footsteps approached across the marble floor. Slow, confident, she turned. Kong Min Jae walked into the room. His white shirt sleeves were still rolled up slightly. His hair was slightly messy now, as if the wind had caught it outside. But there was something else, too. A faint mark on his knuckles. Amina noticed immediately. Are you hurt? The question slipped out before she could stop it. Min Jae looked down at his hand, as if he hadn't noticed. It's nothing. Amina frowned slightly. That doesn't look like nothing. Min Jae walked toward the window and looked out at the city. He won't bother you again tonight. Amina studied him carefully. You scared him. Min Jae didn't respond, because the truth was, fear wasn't what he had given Derek. It had been something much worse. A warning. A final one. Amina crossed her arms nervously. I didn't want you to fight because of me. Min Jae finally looked at her. You didn't cause this. Amina laughed softly, but there was no humor in it. My life seemed to cause trouble everywhere I go. Min Jae shook his head slightly. No. He walked closer. Your ex causes trouble. Amina's eyes dropped to the floor. He wasn't always like this. Min Jae's gaze sharpened. They never are. She looked up, surprised. Min Jae rarely sounded emotional, but there had been something in his voice just now, something personal. Amina hesitated before asking quietly, Have you known someone like him? Min Jae didn't answer right away. For a long moment, the only sound in the room was the distant hum of the city outside. Then he spoke. When I was 12, he said calmly, my neighbor used to beat his wife. Amina froze. Min Jae's eyes were distant now, staring somewhere in the past. She screamed every night. His voice was quiet. The entire street could hear it. Amina felt a chill, but no one did anything. Min Jae's jaw tightened slightly. People closed their windows. He looked at her again. They said it wasn't their business. Amina's chest tightened. What happened to her? Min Jae's answer was simple. One night, the screaming stopped. The room felt colder. Amina understood immediately. Oh! Min Jae's gaze hardened. That's when I decided something. Amina waited. Min Jae's voice was low. If I ever saw a man hurt a woman like that again, his eyes darkened. I would make sure he never had the chance to do it twice. Amina's heart pounded. Suddenly everything about him made sense. The anger, the cold control, the way he stepped in without hesitation. You were just a kid, she said softly. Min Jae shrugged slightly. Some things teach you early. Amina studied his face. For the first time, she saw not just a feared Mafia boss, but the boy he used to be. Zara stirred slightly on the couch. Mama? Her sleepy voice broke the heavy moment. Amina rushed over. I'm here, baby. Zara rubbed her eyes and looked around. Then she spotted Min Jae. You're back. Min Jae nodded. Yes. Zara sat up. Did you beat the bad guy? Amina gasped. Zara. But Min Jae surprised her again. He crouched beside the couch. No. Zara looked confused. You didn't. Min Jae shook his head. I just reminded him to stay away. Zara considered this carefully. Then she nodded seriously. That's good. Min Jae raised an eyebrow. Why? Zara yawned. Because Mama says fighting is bad. Amina smiled weakly. That's true. Zara leaned back into the couch again. But before closing her eyes, she looked at Min Jae. You're staying here tonight, right? Min Jae blinked. No. Zara frowned sleepily. You should. Min Jae glanced at Amina briefly. Why? Zara answered simply. So the monsters don't come back. The room fell quiet. Amina felt tears sting her eyes. Min Jae was silent for a moment. Then he said quietly, There won't be any monsters tonight. Zara seemed satisfied with that answer. Within minutes, she was asleep again. Amina looked at Min Jae. You didn't have to do all this. Min Jae stood. Yes, I did. She frowned. Why? Min Jae looked toward the sleeping child, then back at her. Because someone should have done it for that woman years ago. Amina didn't know what to say. For years she had believed powerful men were dangerous, cruel, selfish. But this one was protecting her. Suddenly, a phone buzzed sharply in the room. One of the bodyguards walked in quickly. Boss! Min Jae turned. What is it? The guard looked uneasy. It's about Derek. Amina's stomach dropped. What now? The bodyguard continued. He left. Min Jae frowned slightly. Where? The guard hesitated. We don't know. Amina's heart started racing again. What does that mean? The guard looked at Min Jae. Men like him don't leave quietly. Min Jae's expression darkened instantly because he knew exactly what that meant. Derek Cole was humiliated, angry, and desperate. which meant the next move he made would be far more dangerous. Min-jae walked toward the window again, staring down at the dark streets below. Then he spoke quietly. "Double the security." The guard nodded immediately. "Yes, boss." Amina hugged herself nervously. "You think he'll come back?" Min-jae didn't lie. "Yes." Amina felt fear creep into her chest again. But then Min-jae said something that made her heart steady. "And when he does?" His voice was calm, cold, certain. "He'll regret it." Outside, somewhere in the city, Derek sat in his truck, gripping the steering wheel, his face twisted with rage. The humiliation burned inside him. "That guy thinks he's better than me," he growled. One of the men beside him asked nervously, "So what now?" Derek's eyes turned dark. He pulled out his phone. "If I can't scare her," he smiled slowly, "I'll take the one thing she cares about most." The man frowned. "You mean the kid?" Derek nodded. "Yeah." His smile grew colder. "Let's see how brave that rich guy is." When the little girl disappears. Part 5. The night stretched deep into silence. Most of the city was asleep. But inside the penthouse, Kang Min-jae was wide awake. He stood near the massive window, his phone in one hand, watching the dark streets below. His instincts had been restless since the bodyguard reported Derek had disappeared. Men like Derek did not retreat quietly. They came back desperate. And desperation made people dangerous. Behind him, Amina sat on the couch, trying to stay calm while Zara slept beside her. Every small sound in the room made her flinch. Min-jae noticed. "You should try to rest," he said without turning. Amina shook her head. "I can't." Her voice was soft but strained. "My mind keeps thinking about what he might do." Min-jae understood that fear well. It was the same fear he had seen in the eyes of his neighbor years ago. The same helplessness. He turned toward her. "He won't reach you." Amina gave a tired smile. "You sound very confident." Min-jae answered simply, "I am." At that exact moment, one of the security phones on the wall buzzed sharply. A bodyguard rushed in. "Boss!" Min-jae's eyes sharpened. "What is it?" The guard looked uneasy. "There's movement outside the building." Amina's stomach dropped instantly. "Is it him?" The guard nodded slowly. Min-jae walked to the security monitor. A grainy camera view showed the street below. A truck had pulled up near the sidewalk, and standing beside it, Derek. But this time he wasn't just angry. He looked wild, unstable. 3 men stood with him. One of them held something in his hand, a crowbar. Amina's breath caught in her throat. "He came back." Min-jae studied the screen carefully. "They're trying to get inside." The guard spoke again. "They're heading toward the side entrance." Amina's heart started racing. "Side entrance?" Min-jae turned. "They won't get far." But even as he said it, another alarm suddenly beeped from the monitor. The guard's face went pale. "Boss!" Min-jae looked back at the screen. One of the security cameras had gone dark. Then another. Then another. "They're cutting the cameras," the guard said. Min-jae's expression hardened instantly. Derek had come prepared. Very prepared. Amina stood quickly. "What's happening?" Min-jae turned toward the bodyguards. "Lock down the building." 2 men rushed out immediately. Min-jae grabbed his jacket from the chair. But before he could move, a sudden noise echoed from the hallway. Footsteps. Running. Then a loud crash. Amina gasped. Zara woke up instantly. "Mama?" The little girl jumped up, frightened by the noise. Amina rushed to hold her. "It's okay, baby." But another loud bang echoed from the hallway. Closer this time. Zara clung tightly to her mother. "Mama, I'm scared." Min-jae stepped forward. "Stay behind me." His voice was calm, but his eyes had turned ice cold. Another bodyguard rushed into the room. They broke through the lower door. Amina's heart nearly stopped. "How did they?" The guard answered quickly. "They forced the lock." Min-jae's mind calculated rapidly. Derek wasn't just angry. He had planned this. Carefully, the hallway suddenly echoed with shouting, then heavy footsteps. They were coming upstairs. Zara buried her face in Amina's chest. "Mama?" Amina's hands trembled. Min Jae turned toward the bodyguards. "Take them to the safe room." The guard nodded. "Now!" But before they could move, a loud voice echoed from the hallway. "Amina!" "Derek!" Amina froze in fear. Zara whimpered. Min Jae stepped forward slowly. The door to the penthouse burst open. Derek stood there breathing heavily. His face was red with rage. Behind him stood two men. One of them held a knife. "There you are," Derek sneered. His eyes locked on Amina. "You thought you could hide?" Min Jae stepped directly in front of her. Derek laughed bitterly. "Oh, look." He pointed at Min Jae. "The rich hero." Min Jae said nothing. Derek's gaze shifted to Zara, and his smile turned cruel. "Well, look at that." Zara shrank back against Amina. The man with the knife stepped forward. "Boss said grab the kid." The words hit the room like thunder. Amina screamed, "No!" But Min Jae moved before anyone else could. His fist struck the man's wrist. The knife clattered across the floor. The second attacker rushed forward, but two bodyguards tackled him instantly. Within seconds, the room exploded into chaos. Shouting, struggling, furniture crashing. Derek saw his chance. He lunged toward Zara. "Come here," Zara screamed. But before Derek could reach her, a powerful hand grabbed the back of his jacket and slammed him against the wall. Hard. Derek groaned as the air left his lungs. Min Jae held him there with terrifying strength. His voice was colder than anything Derek had ever heard. "You came into my building." Derek struggled. "You think you can scare me?" Min Jae leaned closer. "You threatened a child." Derek spat angrily. "She's my daughter, too." Min Jae's eyes flashed. "No." He tightened his grip. "She's someone you will never see again." Derek swung wildly, but Min Jae dodged easily, then struck once. A clean, controlled punch. Derek collapsed to the floor. The other attackers were already pinned by the bodyguards. The fight was over. Just like that, silence returned to the room. Amina hugged Zara tightly, tears running down her face. Min Jae looked down at Derek, then spoke quietly to the guards. "Call the police." Derek's eyes widened. "You wouldn't dare." Min Jae looked at him coldly. "You broke into a private building." Derek realized something too late. His rage had just destroyed him. Sirens began echoing faintly in the distance. Min Jae turned toward Amina. "Are you both all right?" Amina nodded shakily. "Yes." Zara peeked out from her mother's arms. Then she looked at Min Jae. "You saved us again." Min Jae's expression softened slightly. "You're safe now." The little girl studied him for a moment. Then she asked quietly, "Are you going to stay with us?" Min Jae hesitated. Then he answered, "Yes." Because at that moment, he realized something unexpected. This wasn't just about protecting them anymore. Somewhere along the way, he had started to care. And outside, the approaching police sirens meant one thing. Derek Cole's nightmare was only beginning.